everyone, Alexa Dunn here, and today I thought we'd have a bit of fun. I'm going to browse the writing subreddit and I'm going to answer some questions off the cuff, stream of consciousness. You're essentially getting what it's like when I actually browse this subreddit, where I just scroll through, I read the subject lines, a little bit of the preview, and most of the time I go, I sigh deeply. I answer them in my head, or sometimes out loud, a little bit snarkily. But most of the time, I don't actually go in and leave really long comments because if you're not familiar with R writing, it has inspired many videos on this channel. It's a lot of the same questions posted over and over again, a lot of what I would call entry-level questions where if only the person would search the FAQs on that very subreddit or even Google something, they might get the answer they're looking for. And also, honestly, it's a great subreddit. It has really good resources and some really great people on it, but it's also a place where a ton of writers and wannabe writers go to procrastinate, and I just find it amusing. So I thought it would be really fun to kind of go through and you get a view of kind of my reactions to some of these questions. There's always plenty of good questions on the subreddit, but there's always a little bit of ridiculousness. So let's dive in and see what we got. I'm just gonna be browsing on my phone and giving you my first reaction. So, does social media help or hurt your writing process? Personally, both. And I think the answer for a lot of writers is both. It kind of depends on the day and it depends on the social media. I love the often positive distraction of Instagram. It's easier for me to pull myself off Instagram. Twitter can be more of a distraction when I'm actively drafting. I tend to spend less time on Twitter, but then I find Pinterest actually helps my writing process because I use it for brainstorming and research. So it's really a mixed bag, and I'd say we all kind of have this relationship with social media. It's good and it's bad at the same time. I feel like I've run out of ideas or my ideas aren't good. I think this is actually a really common writing problem, especially aspiring writer or pro authors have this as well. And the answer here usually is that you need to refill your well. So I would encourage you to take a break, watch TV shows that you like, watch movies, read books, read bad books. I find bad books weirdly inspiring in the sense that you read something you go, oh, this just wasn't a successful execution of an interesting idea. How would I do it? And sometimes this can lead to a nice, fresh, new idea. Read nonfiction, memoirs, watch a documentary, read an article. There's so many different places to find ideas, and ideas can hit you when you least expect it. So my advice there is not to force it, not to push it, but to go out in the world, consume media, live your life, and usually ideas will come to you. There's a question here about the cost of publishing. I did click into this one, and it basically is like, how do so many authors, young authors, where do they get the money to publish? And they mentioned traditional publishing, and so the answer to that is, if you're traditionally publishing, you don't spend money. Money should always flow to the author. But here's a question on what to send to beta readers, like what to include. My advice for critique partners always is I always start with a partial. I start with a few chapters or 50 pages. Give them a very clear idea of what you're actually looking for. So do you want constructive feedback? Are you looking more for reader impressions, which can be interpreted more as cheerleader feedback? Do you want harsh, honest feedback? Be careful what you ask for. Do you want them to keep track of questions they have while they're reading? Do you want them to let them know when they were bored? Are you looking for like comments in line, or are you okay with kind of an edit letter or bullet pointed list? So I think it's good to be upfront when you exchange materials with someone. Any advice for writing a story without dialogue? They say that the protagonist spends the duration of the book by themselves. Stream of consciousness, have them like lots of internalized thoughts, have them talk to themselves. So you're not actually going to have a story devoid of dialogue of someone speaking, but maybe no one answers. Though maybe they imagine someone answers. They could talk to the trees or animals. So I don't actually think you're going to have a story that doesn't have any dialogue. It just might not be reciprocal conversations people have, but you can still have kind of the character having a conversation with themselves, asking questions and so on. You'd be a better writer if you stopped running to Reddit for back pats. That's the truth. Agree. But I also think that we all have this impulse to kind of go somewhere for community, to ask our silly questions. We do procrastinate. I don't blame anyone for doing it, but I also, my advice is just to write, just write. Reddit can definitely be distracting, and actually to that earlier questions, if we count Reddit as social media, Reddit absolutely can be a distraction when I'm trying to write, and I often go cold turkey on Reddit when I am trying to work on a book. Ooh, do you agree with Stephen King's statement that if you are a bad writer, you cannot become a good one? Controversial opinion time. I'm inclined to agree with Stephen King, but I think that if you are just an okay writer, if you are even a mediocre writer, I do think there are active steps you can take to improve your writing, because writing is a skill. There's craft involved, and craft and skill can be learned. It can be developed. Writing is a muscle that can be developed and should be developed over time to improve. But I do think that people kind of start at a different base level. So I think a bad writer maybe can progress to being an okay writer, a mediocre writer, but I do agree they're probably never going to be a great writer. But I think that a just okay writer can become a good writer with practice and time. And the question becomes like, I don't think a bad writer can become a good or great writer and be necessarily publishable based on their writing. But of course, we've also seen plenty of people we would probably term bad writers get books published because they're a good story. And I think that storytelling and the raw mechanics of writing can be different things. So I agree with Stephen King, but I also think there's nuance here. And my advice to people is you should never give up before you've started. You could, like I said, you can always develop and improve your writing, and in fact, you should be doing that. So what is great world building? This is a tough question, but a good one. For me, great world building is layers. It's a world that feels vivid because there's so much there, but it's not necessarily info dumped on the page. It's subtle details that are given to you through character interactions and things that happen in the text. It's logic. Good world building to me has solid internal logic, and I don't notice it. When I start asking questions about, well, how does that actually work? That's when you get into bad world building very often, or just where it's almost like a play. Like it feels like there's a set, but there's no world beyond the things that are happening on the page. Good world building has a life of its own. The reader can just imagine being there. They can imagine being a character in the world. They want to write fan fiction. I think that's a great sign of great world building, that there's so much there, both subtle and obvious, that the reader wants to imagine more stories in the universe. I think for me, those are signs of good world building. How do you rate a book in English when the setting is in Russia and the character should be speaking Russian? So this is really for any country. Suspension of disbelief is just like part of it. Anytime we see a movie where it's set in another country and like they're supposed to be Russian, but they're all British actors and they're speaking English, we suspend our disbelief. And it's the same thing in a book, even more so. You can make the choice to take whatever setting it is in the language and transliterate it into English, but I think this can really backfire because it can be more awkward to read. It can read as stereotypes. Be very careful. This means like if you're transliterating Chinese to English because it's supposed to be set in China, don't use Pidgin English because it's not nice. There are those certain rhythms to language that I think it can be really good for a narrative when you transliterate a little bit. So like personally, when I write German characters who speak English, because it's a language with which I am very familiar, I do sometimes switch where some of the verbs and direct objects are in the sentence because that's very Germanic. But this does require a deeper knowledge of the language. Don't psych yourself out if you're like, I want to write something set in Russia, but I'm a native English speaker. Just write the book and worry about it later. Honestly, the readers are more or less going to suspend their disbelief. It's all the other details of a world and a culture and a setting that matter more. There are so many ways you can make it feel distinct and properly Russian. You don't have to worry about the fact that everyone is speaking English because you write in English. How many books do you need to sell to be deemed successful in the writing industry? Reddit's actually bringing pretty good questions today. So often when I browse Reddit, I give snarky responses, but these are all legitimate questions. So this one is hard to answer, but I am gonna try because I think this is a common one people ask. And I'm gonna assume this is related to traditional publishing, which is my area of expertise. There's no hard and fast answer. The thing in publishing is to have been published is always an accomplishment. You are successful if you manage to publish any book because it's so hard to get a book published, period. But of course, most of us envision a career in writing, and as proud as we are of publishing one book, we want to publish more books. The sweet spot, I'd say, if you can get past 2 to 3 books, if you can get to selling a 4th book or a 5th book, honestly, in the scheme of things, you're pretty successful. You're doing pretty well, relatively speaking. When you're getting into like 8th, 9th, 10th book territory, you have surpassed most people who ever published. I think without a doubt, that's definitely being successful. But that's just in terms of like raw number of books. The thing with this question is that it's too simple. You have to define success in lots of different ways. Success can mean getting the book of your heart published. Success can mean tons of sales, but success can also mean critical acclaim. It can mean your peers thinking well of you. Success can mean readers reading your book and it impacting them in ways that are specific to them, and they tell you that your writing made a difference to them. That's definitely success. So I don't think just selling books is a metric of success, but in terms of career, typically if you are able to get past 4 or 5 books, you're doing pretty well. Can you have a superhero in a novel? I mean, sure, but are you gonna sell that novel? So here's the thing. You can't always assume that because something does very, very well in comics or in TV and movies that it's going to do well in books. And superheroes is actually one area where the publishing industry just doesn't really respond to them. Typically, books with superheroes in them don't sell as well, and thus many publishers won't even buy them, and thus agents won't even sign them. Specifically in kidlit, which is my area of expertise, it can be really tough. Slightly easier in middle grade, but still pretty overdone, so very hard to do, and almost impossible to sell in young adult fiction. There's actually a superhero YA novel coming out from Tor that is from a debut author, but otherwise the only ones I can think of in the past few years were by best-selling established authors who were able to get their publishers who already loved them to publish this book because they already had a readership. But I'll tell you, if you actually look at sales of superhero books, especially in YA, none of them sell particularly well. But that's a whole other meta conversation about kind of the market and traditional publishing we won't get into. But people post on Reddit all the time about superhero books, and my answer to them honestly is if you have any other idea for a novel, write that other thing and don't write superheroes because you're gonna be disappointed, she says, having spent a year and a half of her life on a superhero YA. That is DOA. So, when is it appropriate to take a writing break from your book? And I can tell from the preview that this person has just started. They're only on chapter 2. That is too soon. If you're hitting writer's block, if you're hitting blocks that early in a draft, something is wrong with your drafting style, your process, your outline, the idea. It's very common to run out of steam after 10,000 words, after 20,000 words, right after Act 1. In Act 2, most people give up on their book after they've completed Act 1 and are struggling with Act 2 because the middle is always hard. I think really you can technically take a break anytime you want, and we all do need to take breaks sometimes, but you need to evaluate whether taking a break is an excuse if you're actually procrastinating, or if something's wrong with the idea, if there's not enough there, or if, again, your process. You know I'm not an outliner, but sometimes it does mean if you are an outliner, you haven't outlined enough, or if you are a pantser, you don't have quite enough to go on. Pantsers still have to have inspiration and something to write toward. Generally advise not taking a break that lasts more than a few days. That is how you break a habit, and having a habit, establishing a habit, a writing habit, is how you finish books. So that's kind of my nebulous answer there. But I don't think you should take a break too early into a draft because it tends to be a sign that something's wrong with the draft. My first draft is garbage. Welcome to the clan of the writer. It's fine. So many of our first drafts are garbage, and that is what revision is for. Ooh, writing contest, enter or not. And this person writes short fiction and is thinking of entering a contest. My brief advice here is to always read the rules and read them carefully. A lot of contests have clauses where they like own your work, where they have the first right of publication or only right of publication, and there can actually be predatory terms in some writing contests, so always read the fine print. How should I start writing? And it's just a subject line. That means they wrote nothing in the post. I can see it has 78 comments, so I'm pretty sure what they say, and they say, you just start writing. It's not rocket science. I do have a video on how to write a book though, and I will link to that down below, which basically does give some actual practical tips, which includes you need a decent idea, you need to have fleshed out in some way, whether you outline or you don't. At least try to outline. I do suggest new authors always try to outline even if it doesn't work out for them, like me. You need something to write with, you need a tool, whether it's Microsoft Word, Google Docs, or Scrivener, whatever it is. Set yourself a deadline. Set yourself some parameters, so that could be a daily word count, it could be an amount of time you write every day, and then just write. That's it. How do you start writing? You write. Oh, how to improve and start in writing, and this person is almost 14. Oh, Advice to young writers. I've been meaning to make a video about this. I love young writers. I mentor teen writers, if you didn't know this. It's one of my favorite things that I do in my life. I've been mentoring for about 5 years. When you are 14, all you have to do, your only job, is just write. Write for fun. Write things that are fun for you. Don't hyper-focus on end goals. Don't focus on perfection. Don't even honestly focus on finishing. Any teenager who can finish a novel is way ahead of me and I applaud you. But writing anything, developing anything is great when you are a teen writer. When you're a young writer, the object should be writing, exploring. Yes, push yourself once you have kind of a base level, but don't freak out too much even about grammar or usage. You're still developing in those. In many cases, you might not have had that awful grammar unit we all tend to have in high school where they make you diagram sentences. Hopefully they don't do that anymore. Hate it. But write because you love writing. Don't focus on publication. Don't even focus on critique. Don't overly focus on I have to give my writing to someone and they need to give me feedback. Write as much as possible, because the thing is, writing is a volume game. Writing is a time game. You have to write a ton to get any good at it. And when you're a young writer, it's the perfect time to just write a ton. Write the things that inspire you and move you. If saying I'm gonna write a novel is a goal that helps you to write more, do that, but don't put too much pressure on yourself. This is also the time when you should be reading. You should be reading anything you can get your hands on. Read for fun. I know that school makes it hard, but nothing is going to help you improve your writing more than reading a ton. So just write for fun and read. Those are my key bits of advice to young writers. I love young writers. Here's kind of a fun one. Do you have an idea for a story that's greater than your current writing ability / skills? I do love these discussion questions. And if you are unfamiliar with Reddit, this is actually pretty fun subreddit to join. Sometimes there are great juicy topics like this. Yes, I totally have ideas like this, and for a while Brightly Burning was actually that idea that I felt I wasn't good enough to write, and eventually I just did it. I think it's great for writers to have these ideas, to have their white whale, the thing where they're like, oh, when I'm a better writer, I'm gonna write this and it's gonna be amazing. A, because it means you always have something in your back pocket. B, because we literally do improve as we write more. With every novel, you're gonna learn something about novel writing that you didn't know already. Revision's also gonna teach you so much, and one day you'll just be like, I think I'm ready to write that book. But then also my note there is sometimes you just have to take the plunge and write the book, because sometimes saying, oh, I'm not ready to write this idea, my white whale, is a way to procrastinate on writing something that might challenge you. So sometimes you just gotta jump in and do it. How do you guys overcome procrastination? This is a great recurring question as well. I get no nonsense with myself. This is where it helps me to set timing for my writing. This is when it's like, no matter what, no excuses. At 10 p.m. you turn off the TV and you write. You try to meet that word count. You have star stickers waiting for you, Alexa. And even if I'm feeling like so not into it, I hold myself to that. And some days it's harder than others, but that is personally how I overcome procrastination. Like, I set quantifiable things that I have to do. Times really help me. And then I just do it no matter what. It doesn't always work. Sometimes a change of scenery is how I overcome procrastination. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to a coffee shop and I'm definitely gonna write, like, no excuses. So again, it's setting a time and doing a thing, but that's what works for me. I didn't mean to kill a character, it just happened. I love writing. This happens all the time. Congratulations, your characters are in control of the story. You're a writer now. Oh, I always love that moment when something happens that I don't expect. I'm like, wait, but I'm the author? And then you start to question like your sanity, but this is actually a really common writer thing where the story kind of takes over, and to me that's one of the most exciting things about the creative process. Here's a random one. Could I market myself as a writer and as an actor under the same name? Yes, you can, and I actually know some people who do this. Data L. Davis, who was a debut with me in 2018 and lives in LA, is also a working actor. She was on Heroes on NBC, and she has other great credits to her name. So yeah, you can totally do that. Here's one of my perennial favorites. What are your guys' thoughts on the idea that grammar, structure, and other rules are necessary to follow when writing? And I'll say it again. The key is to know the rules so you can break them. And if you don't know the rules and you just do whatever you want, you're probably not gonna successfully execute what you're trying to execute. But once you know the thing and why you wanna do it a different way, that's when you reach success. So that's always the key. Just basically, you can totally get away with it as long as you know what you're doing. But I do think rules are important. I think rules and structure are important. And the more you know them, the more you rely on them 90% of the time. So the 10% of the time that you break the rules, you're gonna have a much better outcome. Is it unprofessional to write a novel with Microsoft Word? No. Tons of professionals use Microsoft Word. Like, you're really thinking about this too hard. You can most people write in Microsoft Word. I happen to use Scrivener, but oh, and the question right under it is writing software. Scrivener. Try Scrivener. I love Scrivener. I have videos on Scrivener. I'll link to them down below. This is literally Reddit every day though. People ask these questions over and over and over again. It's so funny. Does anyone else hate reading the word incredulously? No, I love that word. Everyone has specific words though that drive them crazy, so maybe that's theirs. Ooh, what makes you fall in love with an idea? This is fun, and I guess it harkens to the question of like, how do you pick an idea to write? Like, for me, it's tropes and scenes that I'm just excited to write. You should always try to go into a writing project excited to write it. And also, I do like a little challenge. It's a hook, it's a premise where I'm like, I want to see if I can do it, because if I pull it off, it'll be awesome. So it's a bit of the challenge and it's a bit of the fun. And I think that all the ideas that we do ultimately decide to write, they should be a bit of a challenge and they should be fun. Should one make a website for their book before they start querying? No, you really don't need to. And in fact, buying a domain and making a website, if the book doesn't end up going anywhere, you've really just wasted your time. You don't even honestly need a fancy author website when you query. You can if you want. You really don't have to do any of this stuff until you have an agent and you're going on submission. And in that case, you're still only gonna do an author website. Do not waste any time or energy on a book website for traditional publishing until you actually have a book deal. And even then, you usually don't need a separate site for the book. You just need an author website. Self-publishing is another situation where you might want to have a website for the book, but this question is about querying, so it's traditional publishing. Short one, what is the summary on the inside of the dust jacket called? We call it a blurb, usually, which is funny because we also call blurbs the things where like writers endorse a book, but it's back cover copy, it's a book blurb, so. Ooh, how do I finally break free of brainstorming and begin writing? This is also just, there are lots of good questions. I'm now like 2 days, I'm scrolling back 2 days. I personally just kind of know, like there's like a tipping point for me when I'm brainstorming and I'm researching and I'm planning, even when it's picking ideas, and I just know I'm ready to start writing. And I know that's not helpful, but in the sense that honestly, ultimately, you can't ask this question on Reddit and expect anyone to give you a magical answer. You just have to be compelled to start writing or make yourself start writing. Sometimes it really is just the discipline of like being like, no more brainstorming, I'm writing this puppy. And especially I think that people who are pantsers who don't know they're pantsers can get lost in brainstorming because they're brainstorming and they're trying to outline and then they never start writing because it's not perfect. It doesn't feel like you've taken all the steps you're supposed to take. So sometimes it's just honestly, you tell yourself that it's time to stop brainstorming and you just do it. And so the question really is, how do I finally break free of brainstorming and begin writing? Make yourself. Seriously, pick a day to start, pick a time, a setting, whatever it is, an hour, a word count to hit, do nano, whatever it is you need to do. You just basically tell yourself that enough is enough, no more brainstorming. I'm writing, because you continue to brainstorm as you write. At least I do, because I am a plantser, really. So you just have to, it's like the discipline. It's like telling yourself that it's time to shit or get off the pot. How to write a slice of life story without it getting boring? Conflict. Conflict is how you make stories that aren't boring. Boom. Including character-driven stories. You can write a quiet character slice of life story, and it still should have conflict. Question regarding YA novels and character ages. Another perennial question on the writing subreddit that drives me insane because people just ask the same question over and over again. They don't look up the FAQs. They don't even Google it. So I'm going to link all of you to a video that I made, What is YA? Where I talk about what is YA and YA ages, because this question also comes up on YouTube. This one is funny. It says, how do you accurately write high school students? I'm 22, so it has been a while since I've been in school, and I've just been out of touch with today's kids. Slow down. You are 22. You don't get to call high school students kids. I maybe get to call high school students kids because I am in my 30s at this point, but here's the thing. I write YA. It's not that hard to write high school stuff. Plenty of YA writers who write high school set novels are much older than high school. Again, 22 is not that old. It's a matter of remembering what it was like when you were in high school. You just tap into kind of your feelings and empathy and memories, and you write that. In fairness, some people just have a gift for writing YA and writing a YA voice or not. And then honestly, if you really feel that high school has changed super drastically since you were in high school, which generally it doesn't, by the way, you can actually talk to some teenagers. It's not that hard, just try not to be creepy. But seriously, you're 22, nothing has changed. Some things have changed, so I will say YA writers who are older than 30, even older than like maybe 26, 27, there are certain things that have definitely changed in high school since we were in school, but it's not that hard to figure out. Cell phones have changed things, the internet has changed things, more competitive college admissions has changed things, but fundamentally what it's like to be a teenager hasn't really changed, and most high schools are totally like slow to change anyway, and so many of them are just like they used to be. It's so funny, it's just such a good example of me to like, you ask a question on Reddit and it's just a little bit obtuse. It's like, really? You're 22, please. Is it selling out to avoid writing about controversial topics? No, because not everyone has to be the person who writes the serious book, the controversial book, who takes a stand. Like, write what you enjoy writing and what's interesting to you. Like, I write frothy, fun, romantic, commercial books, like, and that's what I enjoy writing. Like, I don't need to be the person who writes like the super serious, like quote unquote controversial books. It's just not my style. And I don't think that's selling out. I don't think it's selling out at all to write something that you enjoy writing that like speaks to you on a personal level, because writing a book is so hard. Like, why would you force yourself to write something you don't want to? So no, it's not selling out. Is switching from first person POV to third person in the same book always a terrible idea? Reddit also gets a ton of POV questions. This is more specific than some of them. Sometimes they just say POV question mark as a subject line. If you have different perspectives and it's alternating chapters, there are a ton of books that do this for structural and format reasons, where indeed one perspective and alternating chapters will be told in third and the other is in first. When done well, it can be super awesome. So as a rule, no, it's not a terrible idea, but you do have to execute it well. Whew, okay, that was exhausting. And the good news for you, because this means you actually got some interesting and concrete information from me, today was a pretty good day on Reddit. I went back about 4 days. I didn't find too much that was ridiculous. A lot of these were just interesting questions, so I answered them honestly. Let me know down below in the comments if you have any questions or comments. Are you on this subreddit frequently? What's the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen on Reddit, on the writing subreddit? Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. This is something I'd super be into making a series. Like, if there's a day where the questions actually are ridiculous, it might be a bit more fun for me to react, or maybe this is just a segment where I answer questions on Reddit and actually give you useful information. So give it a thumbs up if you liked it. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.